My name is Madison Hayes. I'm 22 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my own parents destroyed my Christmas and stole my entire future in one cruel note. I drove 4 hours through Tennessee snow from Atlanta to Knoxville, dreaming about the chaos waiting for me at home. Mom humming to Nat King Cole. Dad sneaking whiskey into the cider. My siblings Evan and Chloe fighting over who got the bigger gift. Instead, I pulled into the driveway on Cedar Hill Road and found our house completely dark.
No porch lights.
No Christmas tree glowing in the window. No sounds of laughter or clinking glasses. Just dead silence. I dragged my nursing school textbooks to the front door, telling myself they were probably at the late church service. But inside, the house felt like a frozen tomb. Then I heard it. The slow scrape of metal against plastic. I found my 83-year-old grandmother Joan hunched over the kitchen table, stabbing at 3-day-old Thanksgiving leftovers from a microwave tray. The turkey looked like rubber. "Grandma, where is everyone?" She didn't answer, just pointed one shaky finger toward the refrigerator. Taped to the door with a magnet was a single piece of notebook paper. My hands trembled as I read it out loud. "Maddie, Merry Christmas. We booked a last-minute cruise to the Bahamas. Don't worry, we'll send photos. Please look after Grandma. Oh, and we borrowed the money from your student loan. You'll understand. Love, Mom and Dad." $10,000.
Gone.
Have you ever felt your entire world shatter in 10 seconds? They left you here alone on Christmas Eve? I whispered. Grandma Jones set down her plastic fork and looked me dead in the eyes. "Sweetheart, this isn't the first time, but it's going to be the last." What she had planned would change everything. I collapsed into the chair next to Grandma Joan, staring at that note until the words blurred together. $10,000. My entire future as a nurse, gone because my parents wanted to sip margaritas on a beach. You need to understand something about the Hayes family. We weren't rich, but we had traditions. Every December 23rd, Mom would drag out her collection of mismatched ornaments while Dad pretended to complain about untangling the lights. Evan and Chloe would argue about everything: who got to put the star on top, who got the last candy cane, whose stocking hung higher on the mantel. And Grandma Joan? She'd sit in her worn leather recliner, like a queen on her throne, watching it all with those sharp blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing. This was supposed to be my reward Christmas. After 3 brutal years of nursing school, 12-hour clinical rotations, and living off ramen noodles, I'd finally made it through my last semester. All I wanted was one perfect holiday with my chaotic, loud, impossible family. Instead, I got this. "How long have you been sitting here alone?" I asked Joan, my voice barely a whisper. She poked at a congealed piece of stuffing. "Since yesterday morning." They left right after breakfast, all excited about their surprise vacation. Didn't even pack me a decent meal. The rage hit me like a freight train. Not just at the stolen money, though that was devastating enough. But the image of Joan, 83 years old, abandoned on Christmas Eve with nothing but microwaved leftovers and the echo of an empty house. That's when something inside me snapped. "This is insane," I said, pacing around the kitchen. "Who does this? Who steals their daughter's tuition money and dumps their elderly mother like garbage?" Joan watched me with those calculating eyes. "Sit down, Madison. We need to talk." Have you ever had that moment when someone's tone changes everything? When you realize the person you thought you knew has been hiding something big? That's exactly what happened next. Joan reached under her placemat and pulled out a thick manila envelope, stuffed so full the edges were splitting. "I've been documenting things for months, sweetheart. Every lie, every theft, every time they've used us." "What do you mean, used us?" She dumped the contents across the table. Bank statements. Receipts, copies of legal documents, even printed out text messages. "Your college fund," she said, pointing to a withdrawal slip from 2019. "Remember when your parents told you the market crashed and your savings disappeared?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah, they said a lot of things. But look at this." She slid a bank transfer across the table. "Same day your fund was emptied, they made a down payment on that boat your dad just had to have." The numbers swam before my eyes. $15,000. My entire college savings, gone to buy Dad a fishing boat he used twice before selling it for half what he paid. "That's not all," Joan continued, her voice getting harder. Remember when Evan borrowed your car for 2 weeks and returned it with a blown engine? He said he'd pay for the repairs. He never intended to.
Look.
Another document. Insurance claim. He totaled your car racing his friends and filed it as an accident. Got the payout and bought himself a motorcycle. I felt sick. And Chloe's credit card debt? That she begged you to cover because she was desperate. Joan's laugh was bitter. She racked up $8,000 on designer clothes and makeup, while you were eating rice and beans for dinner. Each revelation was like a punch to the gut, but what came next destroyed me completely. Joan pulled out a thick folder marked with my name. They've been using your information for years, Madison. Credit applications, loan paperwork. They forged your signature on documents you've never even seen. That's identity theft. It's worse than that. She opened the folder. They've been building debt in your name since you turned 18. If you check your credit report right now, you'll find accounts you never opened, loans you never signed for. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. 3 minutes later, I was staring at a credit report that made no sense. Maxed out credit cards from stores I'd never shopped at. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. Late payments destroying my score month after month. I don't understand, I whispered. Why would they do this to me? Joan's expression softened just slightly. Because they could. Because you trusted them. Because every time they crossed a line, you forgave them and moved on. She was right. Every time Dad borrowed money, I told myself family helped family. When Mom guilt-tripped me into covering Evan's mistakes, I convinced myself it was temporary. When Chloe cried about being broke after spending hundreds on clothes, I handed over my credit card because I couldn't stand seeing her upset. I'd been an enabler, a doormat, a walking ATM for people who should have been protecting me instead of destroying me. What about you? I asked Joan. How have they been using you? Her jaw tightened. My retirement fund.
Gone.
They convinced me to co-sign a small business loan for your father's landscaping idea. $35,000 down the drain when he decided he didn't like getting his hands dirty. Grandma, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Get angry. She leaned forward, those sharp eyes blazing. Because anger is what's going to save us both. She stood up, walked to the kitchen window, and stared out at the empty driveway where my parents' car should have been parked. I've been quiet too long, forgiving too much, letting them take until there's nothing left. She turned back to me, but I've also been planning. Something in her voice made my skin prickle. Planning what? Joan smiled, and for the first time since I'd walked into this house, it wasn't sad. It was sharp, dangerous, justice. What would you do if you discovered your family had been systematically destroying your life for years? Because what my grandmother had been plotting in secret was about to change everything. Joan walked over to the old wooden chest in the corner of the living room, the one we'd always been told held nothing but moth-eaten blankets and Christmas ornaments from the 1970s. She was lying. Inside that chest was a treasure trove of evidence that would make a private investigator jealous. File folders organized by year. Bank statements highlighted in different colors. Legal documents paper-clipped to handwritten notes. Even photographs, pictures I'd never seen before. Grandma, what is all this? She pulled out a thick binder labeled Patricia and Douglas Hayes, Financial Crimes 2020 to 2024. My parents' names written in her careful cursive, like a death warrant. I started keeping records after the boat incident, she said, settling back into her chair. Something about that whole situation felt wrong. Your father claiming the market crashed, your college fund mysteriously disappearing, but suddenly he's got money for a $25,000 fishing boat. She opened the binder to the first section. Photos of Dad on his new boat, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Bank statements showing the exact date my college savings were withdrawn. Credit card receipts from the boat dealership. I may be 83, but I'm not stupid. So, I started paying attention. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted has been lying to you for years? That sinking feeling when all the pieces suddenly click into place? That's what happened as Joan walked me through her evidence, document by document. The landscaping business loan she'd co-signed? Dad never intended to start a business. The $35,000 went straight to paying off gambling debts he'd racked up at the Cherokee Casino. She had photos of him there, timestamps from the same week he claimed to be buying equipment. Evan's car accident that destroyed my Honda? Not an accident. Joan had tracked down witnesses who saw him racing on Highway 75 at 2 in the morning. She even had video footage from a gas station security camera showing him drinking before getting behind the wheel. And Chloe's credit card emergency? While I was working double shifts at the campus bookstore to help her pay it off, she was posting Instagram stories from shopping sprees in Nashville. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, hotel stays at luxury resorts. All paid for with cards in my name. This is insane, I whispered, flipping through photo after photo. They've been scamming us for years. Gets worse, Joan said grimly. She pulled out a folder marked Identity Theft. Madison Hayes. Inside were copies of loan applications, credit card agreements, even a mortgage pre-approval, all with my forged signature. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how good the forgeries were. They've been practicing, Joan explained. Look at these birthday cards from 2019, then compare them to your signature on this loan from 2023. They've been perfecting your handwriting for 4 years. My hands started shaking. How much debt are we talking about? Joan's expression went dark. $47,000. And that's just what I've found so far. $47,000 in debt that would destroy my credit for years. Debt that could follow me into my nursing career, affect my ability to get a mortgage, even impact professional licensing. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen my entire future. There's more, Joan said quietly. About the house. What about the house? She pulled out a thick stack of mortgage documents. They've been taking out home equity loans against this property for 3 years. This house that's been in our family for 40 years? It's mortgaged to the hilt. If they miss payments, we all lose it. I felt like I was drowning. How much do they owe? $230,000. The room spun around me. Our family home, worth maybe $150 on a good day, was buried under mortgage debt that would take decades to pay off. But here's what they don't know, Joan continued, and her voice took on that dangerous edge again. I still own 40% of this property. My late husband's name is on the original deed, and when he died, his share transferred to me, not to your parents. So, Joan's smile was pure steel. So they can't make any more financial decisions about this house without my signature. And I've already contacted a lawyer. Wait. Joan had contacted a lawyer? Meet Margaret Chen, Joan said, pulling out a business card. Retired from the district attorney's office last year, but she still takes private cases, especially ones involving elder abuse and identity theft. Elder abuse. The words hit me like a slap. She's also the one who helped me figure out how to trace all their financial crimes. Turns out, when you steal from family members, you leave a paper trail a mile wide. Joan opened another folder. This one was labeled Criminal Evidence. Bank security footage of Dad withdrawing money from my accounts using my debit card. Email chains between him and Mom discussing how to handle my college fund. Text messages where they laughed about leaving Joan alone for Christmas while they partied in the Bahamas. But the most damning evidence was a voice recording. Joan pressed play on an old cassette recorder, and I heard my parents' voices clear as day. She'll never figure it out, Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. Madison's too trusting, and Joan's too old to understand modern banking. Just make sure you space out the withdrawals, Mom replied. We can't have them both catching on at the same time. Please. Madison would forgive us for murder if we said we were sorry. And what's Joan gonna do, call the cops on her own son? They laughed. Actually laughed about destroying our lives. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to drive to the Bahamas and drag them both back here by their hair. Instead, I started crying. Ugly, angry tears that felt like they'd been building up for years. I've been such an idiot, I sobbed. I trusted them. I defended them. Every time someone told me they were taking advantage of me, I made excuses for them. Joan reached over and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You weren't an idiot. You were a good daughter and granddaughter who expected the same loyalty you gave. That's not your fault, it's theirs. She squeezed my fingers tighter. But now you know the truth. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I wiped my face with the back of my hand. What can we do? The money's gone. The debt is in my name. They're on a cruise ship somewhere drinking cocktails with my tuition money. Joan stood up and walked back to the chest. She pulled out one more folder. This one labeled the plan. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and that steel smile was back. "You think I've been collecting all this evidence just for fun?" She opened the folder and I saw legal documents, contact information, even a timeline written out in her precise handwriting. "I've been planning this for months. Every detail. Every step. Your parents think they're so clever, but they've made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Joan's eyes glinted with something I'd never seen before. Pure, calculated vengeance. They underestimated us. What would you do if you discovered your family had been systematically destroying your life for years and your grandmother had been secretly building a case against them? Because what Joan had planned wasn't just revenge, it was complete and total justice. And it was about to get very, very interesting. Joan spread out what looked like a battle plan across our kitchen table. Charts, timelines, contact lists, and legal documents organized with military precision. "Meet the team," she said, pointing to 3 business cards lined up like playing cards. First card, Margaret Chen, attorney at law. 30 years prosecuting financial crimes. She's seen everything your parents have done 100 times before. Second card, Frank Morrison, CPA. Used to work fraud investigations for the IRS. He knows exactly how to trace stolen money and reverse fraudulent transactions. Third card, Detective Rita Williams, Knox County Sheriff's Office. My neighbor's daughter. She specializes in identity theft cases. I stared at the cards. "You've been building a team?" "For 6 months, Joan said proudly. "Ever since I found the first forged loan document with your name on it. I knew this day would come." She pulled out a thick folder labeled Phase 1, Immediate Protection. "First thing we do tomorrow morning is freeze your credit. Frank already has the paperwork ready. Every account they've opened in your name gets flagged for fraud investigation." "Can we do that?" "Honey, identity theft is a federal crime. The banks are required by law to investigate once we file a report." Joan's smile was sharp as a knife. "And once that investigation starts, every fraudulent transaction gets reversed." She flipped to the next page. Phase 2, Secure the assets. I looked at the detailed checklist she'd written out. Change locks on the house, locksmith scheduled for tomorrow. Move Joan's remaining savings to a new bank account. Remove Patricia and Douglas from all joint accounts. Transfer utilities into Joan's name only. Install security cameras around the property. "You've thought of everything," I said, amazed. "Not everything. Margaret thought of most of it." Joan pulled out another document. "This is a restraining order. Pre-filled. Ready to file. The moment your parents try to intimidate us or access this property illegally, we activate it." My head was spinning. This seems so extreme. Joan's expression hardened. "Extreme? Madison, they stole $57,000 from us. They destroyed your credit. They've been committing felonies for years while we smiled and forgave them." She was right, but something still felt overwhelming about fighting back this hard. What if they really didn't mean to hurt us? What if they just got in over their heads and... "Stop." Joan's voice cut through my doubts like ice. "Listen to yourself. They recorded you saying you'd forgive them for murder. They abandoned me alone at Christmas with 3-day-old leftovers. They stole your entire future and went on vacation to celebrate." She grabbed the cassette recorder and pressed play again. My parents' laughter filled the kitchen as they joked about how stupid and trusting we were. The sound of their mockery killed every last bit of sympathy in my heart. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I'd heard it in hours. "What's Phase 3? Joan grinned like a wolf. "Phase 3, The Reckoning." She opened the final folder, and inside was a document that made my breath catch. "Debt collection lawsuit," she explained. "Margaret's already drafted it. Every penny they've stolen, plus interest, plus damages for identity theft, plus legal fees." "We're suing them?" "We're destroying them legally," Joan corrected. "But only if they refuse to cooperate with Phase 4. "There's a Phase 4? Joan pulled out one last document. A contract, written in official legal language, with signature lines at the bottom. "The choice," she said dramatically. "When they come home from their cruise, we present them with an option. They can sign this repayment agreement, Every penny they've stolen, paid back over 2 years with interest, or we file criminal charges for identity theft, elder abuse, and fraud. I read through the contract. It was brutal. $200 a month for every thousand they'd stolen. Full restitution for my destroyed credit. Joan's retirement fund restored completely. Late fees if they missed a single payment. What if they refused to sign? Joan's smile turned predatory. Then Detective Williams arrests them for identity theft. Frank audits their taxes for the past 5 years. Margaret files a civil lawsuit that seizes their car, their bank accounts, even their cruise photos as evidence of stolen money. You're talking about ruining their lives. I'm talking about justice. Joan's voice went deadly quiet. They've had years to do the right thing. Years to stop stealing from us. Instead, they got greedier and more careless. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty driveway. Your father gambled away my retirement fund and blamed the stock market. Your mother forged your signature on loan documents and called it helping family. They left me alone at Christmas and called it a surprise vacation. Joan turned back to me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. They counted on us being weak, being forgiving, being too nice to fight back. She picked up Margaret Chen's business card. They miscalculated. I looked at the evidence spread across our table. Bank statements, forged documents, recorded confessions, legal contracts. Joan had built an airtight case that would stand up in any court. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I realized they were never going to stop. Joan sat back down beside me. I love your parents, Madison. They're my family. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. She was right. How many times had I made excuses for Dad's borrowing? How many times had I covered for Evan's mistakes or Chloe's overspending? How many times had I told myself that family meant always forgiving, always helping, always giving second chances? They'd taken my kindness and weaponized it against me. What if this destroys our family forever? I asked. Joan reached over and squeezed my hand. Sweetheart, they already destroyed our family. We're just refusing to pretend everything's fine. She was absolutely right. The family I'd been mourning, the loving, supportive, chaotic Christmas family. That family had never actually existed. It was a lie I'd been telling myself while they systematically robbed me blind. So we really do this? I asked. We fight back. Joan's grip tightened on my hand. We fight back. Looking at my grandmother, 83 years old, sitting in her kitchen surrounded by evidence of her own family's betrayal, planning their legal destruction with the precision of a military general, I realized something important. Joan Hayes wasn't just my grandmother. She was a warrior. And it was time I became one too. What would you do if you had the chance to make your family face real consequences for years of theft and betrayal? Because our plan was about to get very, very real. The next morning, I sat in Frank Morrison's office watching him pull up my credit report on his computer screen. What I saw made my stomach drop through the floor. This is worse than we thought, Frank said, scrolling through page after page of accounts I'd never opened. They've been busy. 7 credit cards. 3 personal loans. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. Even a mortgage pre-approval that I definitely hadn't applied for. The total debt was climbing past $60,000 as Frank tallied it up. How is this even possible? I whispered. Easy, Frank replied grimly. They had access to your social security number, your birth certificate, your mother's maiden name, all the information needed to steal someone's identity. Plus, they live with you, so they knew your address history, your employment information, everything. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Frank found when he dug deeper into my father's financial records. Madison, I need you to prepare yourself for this. He pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal loan documents that made my blood freeze. My name. My signature. But not just forged, photocopied from real documents I'd actually signed. They've been practicing your signature for years, Frank explained. But they got smart about it recently. Instead of forging new signatures, they've been scanning your real signature from old documents and copying it onto new paperwork. He showed me a car loan application dated 3 months ago. The signature looked perfect because it was perfect. It was actually my signature, lifted from my nursing school enrollment forms and digitally pasted onto a loan I'd never seen. This is sophisticated identity theft, Frank continued. Your parents haven't just been stealing from you. They've been building a parallel financial life in your name. I felt sick. What do you mean? Frank pulled out another stack of documents. They've established credit in your name, built up your credit score by making small payments, then maxed everything out right before disappearing on this cruise. The room started spinning. They planned this. Oh, this was definitely planned. Frank's voice was ice cold. Look at the timeline. Every major withdrawal, every new account, every loan application, it all happened in the 2 weeks before they left for the Bahamas. He spread out the documents chronologically, and the pattern was undeniable. My parents had been systematically draining every available source of money, my accounts, Joan's accounts, new credit lines in my name, building up to one final massive theft before vanishing on their surprise vacation. They weren't planning to come back, were they? I asked. Frank's expression was grim. Based on this evidence, I'd say they were planning to disappear for a lot longer than a 1-week cruise. That's when my phone rang. Mom's number. I looked at Frank, then at Joan, who had driven with me to this meeting. She nodded. Answer it. But put it on speaker. We need to record this. My hands shook as I accepted the call. Madison, honey. Mom's voice was bright and cheerful, with steel drums and laughter in the background. How's everything at home? Where are you? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Still in Nassau. This place is incredible. Your father's been parasailing, and I found the most amazing spa. We decided to extend our trip another week. Joan and Frank exchanged glances. Another week, which meant they'd miss New Year's, too. Mom, we need to talk about the money you took from my student loan account. A pause. Then forced laughter. Oh, that. Don't worry about it, sweetie. We'll pay you back when we get home. When will that be, exactly? Another pause, longer this time. Well, we're having such a good time, and flights are so expensive right now. Maybe another 2 weeks? 3 at most. 3 weeks. With my money. While Joan sat alone in an empty house. What about Grandma? You left her alone for Christmas. She's fine. She has you there with her now. Besides, Joan's tougher than she looks. She can handle a few weeks on her own. Frank scribbled a note and held it up. Keep her talking. Mom, I checked my credit report today. Dead silence. Then, why would you do that? Because I'm trying to figure out how I have 7 credit cards I never applied for. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard Dad's voice in the background. Hang up. Hang up right now. Madison. Mom's voice had changed completely. Gone was the cheerful vacation tone. You need to understand, we were in a desperate situation. Your father's business. Dad doesn't have a business. He was trying to start one. The landscaping thing didn't work out, but he had other ideas and we needed startup capital. You stole my identity. We borrowed against your credit. It's different. Frank was writing furiously, documenting every admission. Borrowed? I never gave you permission to open accounts in my name. You're our daughter. We shouldn't need permission to. That's identity theft, Mom. It's a federal crime. Another long pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line, and he wasn't trying to hide his anger anymore. Listen here, Madison. We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Everything we have, we've shared with you. So don't you dare lecture us about borrowing a little money when we needed it. A little money? You stole $60,000. We didn't steal anything. That money was always family money. Your college fund, Joan's retirement, your credit, it's all family resources. And family helps family. Joan grabbed the phone from my hands. Douglas, she said, her voice deadly calm. This is your mother. I want you to listen very carefully. Mom, what are you doing there? I'm sitting in a fraud investigator's office, listening to you admit to identity theft on a recorded line. Complete silence. You stole from your daughter. You forged her signature. You destroyed her credit. You abandoned me alone at Christmas while you spent her tuition money on a vacation. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Joan's voice was pure steel. You're thieves. And thieves face consequences. You can't be serious. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, Douglas. Family doesn't abandon elderly parents. Family doesn't destroy their children's futures for vacation money. I heard Mom crying in the background. Dad's voice cracked when he spoke again. What do you want from us? Joan looked at Frank, who nodded. It was time. You have 24 hours to get on a plane and come home. When you arrive, you'll find Margaret Chen's business card on the kitchen table. You'll call her and you'll sign a legally binding repayment agreement for every penny you've stolen. And if we don't, Joan's smile was terrifying. Then Detective Williams will be waiting at the airport with handcuffs. The line went dead. Frank leaned back in his chair, grinning. Well, that went better than expected. They just confessed to multiple felonies on a recorded line. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. They're really going to face consequences. Oh, they're going to face consequences, Joan said firmly. The only question now is whether they face them as family members making amends or as criminals going to prison. What would you do if you discovered your parents had been planning to disappear permanently after stealing your entire future? Because our family reunion was about to get very, very interesting. 26 hours later, I was sitting in Cracker Barrel on Kingston Pike, watching my parents walk through the door looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Dad's vacation, 10 couldn't hide the deep lines around his eyes. Mom's hands shook as she clutched her purse. They both looked like people who'd spent their flight home realizing their world was about to collapse. Joan and I had chosen this location carefully. Public place. Lots of witnesses. Hard to make a scene without everyone staring. Margaret Chen sat at the table next to us, pretending to read legal documents while actually recording everything on her phone. Madison, honey, Mom started, rushing toward me with fake tears already streaming. We need to explain. Sit down, Joan interrupted, her voice cutting through Mom's performance like a blade. Both of you. Now. They sat. Dad couldn't even look at me. Mom kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but I noticed she kept checking her reflection in her phone camera between sobs. Before we start, Joan said calmly, I want you both to understand something. Everything you say from this moment forward is being recorded for legal purposes. Dad's head snapped up. You can't record us without. Actually, Tennessee is a one-party consent state, Margaret Chen said from the next table, not looking up from her papers. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's perfectly legal. Mom's fake crying stopped instantly. Who is that? Margaret Chen, attorney at law. Joan replied smoothly. She's here to make sure everything we discuss today is legally binding. The color drained from Dad's face. This wasn't going to be a family argument where they could guilt trip and manipulate their way out of consequences. This was a business meeting. Let's start with the basics, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You stole $10,000 from my student loan account. We borrowed, Mom began. You stole, I continued, another $47,000 by opening credit accounts in my name without my permission. Madison, if you'd just let us explain. You also, Joan interrupted, stole $35,000 from my retirement fund for a fake business loan. Dad finally found his voice. That wasn't fake. I really was going to start a landscaping business. With what equipment? Joan shot back. Because according to Frank Morrison's investigation, that money went straight to Cherokee Casino to pay off your gambling debts. The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish. How do you, he whispered, know about your gambling problem? Joan's smile was razor-sharp. Douglas, I may be 83, but I'm not blind. I've been documenting your lies for months. She pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table between them. Bank records showing exactly where my money went. Photos of you at the casino. Even receipts from ATM withdrawals made with my debit card while I was asleep. Mom was staring at the folder like it might explode. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting myself, Joan corrected. Because apparently my own family thinks stealing from me is acceptable. Dad's face was turning red. We never meant for it to go this far. The gambling started small, just a way to blow off steam after work. And then you lost your job, Joan continued relentlessly. But you kept gambling anyway. Using our money. I was trying to win it back. Dad exploded. If I could just hit one big jackpot, I could pay everyone back and nobody would ever know. Several people at nearby tables turned to stare. Dad lowered his voice, but his desperation was still visible. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The bills, the mortgage, your mother's medical expenses. My medical expenses? Mom snapped. What medical expenses? I haven't been to a doctor in 2 years. I meant the dental work you needed. I never got dental work, Douglas. They were turning on each other. Perfect. Margaretchen approached our table and set a document in front of my parents. This is a full restitution agreement. Every penny stolen from Madison and Joan, repaid over 24 months with interest. Dad picked up the paper and his face went white. $92,000? We don't have $92,000. Then you'll get jobs and make monthly payments, Joan said flatly. $4,000 a month until it's paid off. $4,000 a month? Mom shrieked. We can't afford that. You could afford a cruise to the Bahamas, I pointed out. That was different. That was a once-in-a-lifetime. That was stolen money, Margaretchen interrupted. Money that legally belongs to your daughter and mother-in-law. She set another document on the table. This is your alternative. Criminal charges for identity theft, elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. If convicted, you're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The silence stretched out until I thought someone might actually pass out. Finally, Dad spoke. What if we can't make the payments? Joan leaned forward. Then you lose everything. The house gets sold to pay the debt. Your car, your belongings, your bank accounts. Everything gets seized until the debt is satisfied. You can't take our house. Mom protested. Where would we live? Should have thought about that before you decided to steal from your family, Joan replied without a hint of sympathy. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I needed them to understand. I also want you both to know, I said, my voice carrying across the restaurant, that I've spoken to Evan and Chloe. Both my parents froze. They know exactly what you did. How you stole my college money, destroyed my credit, abandoned Grandma Joan at Christmas. I sent them copies of everything. You had no right, Dad started. They're ashamed of you, I continued. Evan said he never wants to see you again. Chloe blocked your phone numbers. Mom's fake tears turned real. You turned our children against us. You turned our children against you, Joan corrected, by being thieves and liars. Margaretchen pulled out a pen and set it on the table. You have exactly 60 seconds to make a choice. Sign the restitution agreement, or I file criminal charges. Dad's hand shook as he reached for the pen. This is insane. We're family. Family forgives each other. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said firmly. Family doesn't abandon elderly parents. Family doesn't destroy their children's futures. Joan's voice was ice cold. You want forgiveness? Pay back every penny you stole. Until then, you're not family. You're criminals who happen to share our DNA. Dad signed his name with a hand so shaky it looked like a child's writing. Mom followed, sobbing dramatically. But Joan wasn't finished with them yet. One more thing, she said, pulling out a final document. My will has been updated. Everything I own, the house, my savings, my investments, all of it goes directly to Madison. What? Mom gasped. You thought you'd inherit something after robbing me blind? Joan laughed. Every penny I have goes to the granddaughter, who actually deserves it. Dad slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. You're really going to destroy us over this? You destroyed yourselves, Joan replied. We're just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. Margaretchen collected the signed documents and stood up. First payment is due January 15th. $4,000, cashier's check, delivered to my office. Miss a payment, and the criminal charges get filed automatically. As my parents stumbled toward the exit, Looking like they'd been hit by a truck, Joan turned to me with satisfaction written all over her face. "How do you feel?" she asked. I watched them walk to their car, the car they'd probably have to sell to make their first payment, and realized something amazing. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. What would you do if you finally made your family face real consequences for years of betrayal? Because our story was far from over. 3 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I thought we'd won. Mom and Dad had made their first payment, barely and 2 days late, but they'd managed to scrape together $4,000. They'd sold Dad's motorcycle, Mom's jewelry, and were both working double shifts at jobs they hated. Justice felt sweet. But Joan wasn't finished with them yet. She called me into the living room on a Sunday morning, spread out a mountain of documents across the coffee table, and smiled like a woman who'd just won the lottery. "Madison, sweetheart, it's time I told you the whole truth." "What whole truth?" Joan picked up a thick folder labeled Financial Assets, Joan Hayes. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property assessments. "Your parents think they're fighting over scraps," Joan said with obvious satisfaction. "They think this house is worth maybe $150, that my savings are mostly gone, that they've successfully stolen everything of value." She pulled out an official property appraisal dated just last month. "They're wrong." I stared at the number on the page. $420,000. The house is worth that much? The land alone is worth $300,000 because the city wants to expand the greenbelt, and our property borders the park system. I've been quietly negotiating with city planners for months. My head was spinning. But what about their mortgage payments? Won't the bank? Joan's grin was pure wickedness. "There is no mortgage." "What?" "I paid it off in full 6 months ago using money from my investment accounts. Every payment they think they're making on the house, that money goes into a separate savings account that will also belong to you." I sank into the couch. "So, they're essentially paying me rent to live in my house?" "Exactly. And since they forged loan documents claiming the house as collateral, they're technically paying rent on property they committed fraud against." Joan's laugh was triumphant. "Margaret Chen says that's additional grounds for criminal charges if they ever try to stop making payments." But she wasn't done revealing her secrets. Joan pulled out another folder, this one stuffed with investment statements. "I've been setting money aside since the day you were born, Madison. College fund, investment portfolios, even a separate retirement account in your name." She spread out the statements, account after account, each showing balances I couldn't have imagined. "How much?" I whispered. $237,000. All invested in stable, long-term growth funds. I couldn't breathe. "Grandma, this is your insurance policy," Joan said firmly. "Your parents will never be able to hurt you financially again. You could pay off medical school, buy your own house, start a business, whatever you want." "But when did you change your will?" Joan's eyes twinkled. 3 years ago, right after your father's first gambling binge. I knew then that your parents would never stop stealing unless they faced real consequences. So I made sure that when the time came, you'd have the resources to fight back." She pulled out one more document, a legal will, notarized and official. "Everything I own has been yours for 3 years. The house, the investments, even my life insurance policy. Your parents have been making payments on property they lost the right to inherit long before they even knew they were thieves." The full scope of Joan's plan was staggering. She hadn't just been protecting us from my parents' theft. She'd been building a financial empire designed to ensure my independence forever. "There's one more surprise," Joan said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Margaret Chen has been working with me on something special." She opened the envelope and showed me official-looking documents. A scholarship foundation. The Joan Hayes Nursing Education Fund. "We're using part of the house's value to create scholarships for nursing students whose families can't afford tuition." "You're starting a charity?" "We're starting a charity," Joan corrected. "You'll run it after you graduate. Help other students avoid what happened to you." Looking at my grandmother, 83 years old, sitting in her living room surrounded by evidence of the most sophisticated financial protection plan I'd ever seen, I realized something incredible. Joan Hayes hadn't just outmaneuvered my parents. She'd built a legacy that would protect students for generations. "How long have you been planning all this?" Joan's smile was soft but determined. Since the day I realized that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I've spent my whole life enabling your father's bad decisions and your mother's selfishness. But I refuse to let them do the same thing to you. She reached over and took my hand. You're going to graduate debt-free, Madison. You're going to own property worth nearly $500,000. You're going to have investments that will grow for the rest of your life. And most importantly, you're going to know that you're strong enough to protect yourself from people who would hurt you. I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender soap and determination. What happens now? Joan's eyes sparkled with mischief. Now we wait for your parents to finish making their payments. And when they're done, we invite them over for dinner and show them exactly what they lost by choosing to be thieves instead of family. What would you do if your grandmother secretly built you a financial empire while teaching your family the hardest lesson of their lives? Because Joan's plan was about to reach its perfect conclusion. 2 years later, I walked across the graduation stage at East Tennessee State University with Joan cheering louder than anyone else in the entire auditorium. She was sitting in the front row, wearing her best dress and waving like I'd just won the Olympics. My parents were there too. In the back row, quiet but present. The monthly payments had been brutal on them. $4,000 every month for 24 months. Dad took a job driving delivery trucks. Mom cleaned offices at night. They sold their car and bought a used Honda. They moved into a smaller apartment and gave up cable TV. But something amazing happened during those 2 years. They actually learned what accountability meant. The first sign came 6 months in, when Dad missed a payment deadline by 3 days. Instead of making excuses, he called Margaret Chin directly and explained that his truck had broken down, costing him 2 days of work. He paid the late fee without complaint and asked if he could set up automatic payments to make sure it never happened again. The second sign came when Mom found out Chloe was pregnant and didn't immediately offer to pay for baby clothes with money she didn't have. Instead, she taught Chloe how to budget and took her to Goodwill to find gently used baby items. By the time they made their final payment, delivered personally to Margaret Chen's office with a handwritten apology letter. My parents had become different people. Not perfect people, but people who finally understood that actions have consequences. 3 months after graduation, Joan and I invited them over for dinner. The first family meal we'd shared in the house since that devastating Christmas Eve. I need to say something, Dad said before we'd even finished serving the meatloaf. What we did was unforgivable. We stole from you both. We abandoned Joan. We destroyed Madison's credit. There's no excuse for any of it. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. I've been to therapy. Real therapy, not just church counseling. I'm learning about financial abuse and how it damages families. We damaged our family. Joan listened quietly, then stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. She came back with a thick folder, not one of her evidence files, but something new. This, she said, setting it between my parents, is Madison's graduation gift to both of you. Dad opened the folder cautiously. Inside was a business plan, complete with financial projections and market analysis. A landscaping company. Dad looked confused. A real one this time, I said. With actual equipment, proper licensing, and a business account that only you have access to. Joan and I are providing the startup capital, but it's a loan with reasonable terms and a payment plan you can actually manage. We don't understand, Mom whispered. Joan's voice was gentle but firm. You've spent 2 years proving that you can be responsible with money. You've learned to make payments on time, stick to a budget, and work hard without cutting corners. Those are the skills you need to run a business. But why would you trust us after everything we did? I looked at my parents, really looked at them. Dad's hands were calloused from honest work. Mom had lost the entitled look she used to wear like armor. They both looked tired but genuine. Because real love sets boundaries, I said, using Joan's words. But it also recognizes when people have genuinely changed. Joan pulled out one more document. Your restitution is complete. But I have one more requirement. Anything, Dad said immediately. Promise me you'll never gamble again. Not $1. Not a scratch-off ticket. Nothing. Dad's voice was steady and clear. I promise. And promise me that if you ever find yourselves in financial trouble, you'll ask for help instead of stealing from family. We promise, Mom said. 6 months later, Hayes Landscaping had its first major contract, maintaining the grounds at East Tennessee Children's Hospital, where I now work as a pediatric nurse. Dad hired 2 employees, and Mom does the bookkeeping. Joan moved into a beautiful senior living community last month, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She's teaching financial literacy classes to other residents and has started dating a retired banker named Frank. I used part of my inheritance to buy a small apartment building near the nursing school. I rent it to nursing students at below market rates, and every tenant gets a small scholarship from the Joan Hayes Nursing Education Fund. Sometimes people ask if I regret being so hard on my family, if I think Joan and I went too far. But when I see my parents working together to build something honest, when I watch Joan thriving in her new community, when I help young nurses avoid the debt trap that almost destroyed my future, I know we made the right choice. Real love doesn't enable destructive behavior. Real love sets boundaries, enforces consequences, and creates space for people to become better. Joan Hayes taught me that the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let people hurt themselves, or you, in the name of family loyalty. What would you do if you had the chance to teach your family about consequences while still leaving room for redemption? Let me know in the comments, because I still believe forgiveness and accountability can coexist. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more stories.